r/ask Reddit. When did your something is very wrong here feeling turned out to be true? We had a neighbor who made me feel very uncomfortable. One day, he leaned in the doorway of my bedroom, and I got an immediate get the duck out of here vibe. I turned, walked under the weird loop bridge he was making with his arm, all without responding to him. He asked, "Where are you going?" My family was with his. These families had been friends for about 35 years at this point, and he knew I was alone. I was a 9-year-old boy. He was a 30-year-old man. The second I rounded the corner, I ran out of the house and rejoined the cookout. He was later convicted of molesting his son, who was about my age, and I'd already been molested once in my life by someone else. So my mind was like, dude, I can only suppress so much. Get the duck out of here now. Mom sat me down when I was 18, already in tears, proclaiming she had something serious to tell me. Being the sarcastic and nervous duck I am, I turned and joked, "What? Is dad not my real dad anymore?" Welp, folks. My mom and dad had this friend that I hated. I thought he was just creepy and weird, and when I'd tell them I hated him they were like, "Be nice." Blah blah blah. Turns out he molested his stepchildren. Now he's in jail. I think these unconscious feelings we get are really important and can be extremely beneficial if we learn to listen to them. But we're taught from early on to ignore them and act opposite what they tell us. That's a dangerous game to play. I worked at a fast food restaurant and I got an antsy phone call from my dad telling me to come home ASAP. There were storms on the way and he was nervous about the timing. I thought he was being paranoid until I got this really uneasy feeling as well. Every nerve in my body was telling me to get home right now. I pissed off the manager when I left without mopping the floors. I rushed home and I had barely gotten into the door for 2 minutes before a tornado hit our house. Looking back on it, if I didn't leave when I did, I would have been driving along the road the tornado followed and I probably wouldn't be here. I got written up at work for leaving without completing my tasks, but a write-up is better than being dead. Come home, son, before the tornado tears the house down. Family friend from my uncle's church was on vacation with us when I was around 11 or 12. I wanted to go for a walk in the woods. My mom said no. He jumped in and insisted he would go with me. She says yes. As we're walking, I'm getting this weird vibe from the guy. He keeps insisting on taking pictures of me. I keep getting more creeped out. Eventually he's got my cornered and my mind just goes into total fight or flight. He's got his hands on my thighs and there's nowhere I can go, so I'm plotting in my head how I'll launch myself at him and gouge his eyes out. Just as I'm about to make my move, a relative who knew he was a pedo and was worried about what would happen makes his presence known. A few years later the family friend went to prison for raping a bunch of kids, including most of my cousins. I'm pretty sure I was almost raped that day. How was this guy still allowed around your cousins after this incident? Something is not right. That guy should have been beat, shunned, shamed and handed over to police the very first time. Buying weed in Cuba when I was 16. Super nice guy. One of the first people I had met in Cuba. Had only been there 2 weeks. I asked him for weed. He was like, "OMG, I sell weed." He's like, "I just got to pick it up from my house." I was, "No problem. You are a friend, this isn't weird." So, we enter the house, but part of the side wall is blown out into a doorway to connect all the houses on the street. I would say there is about 10. So, we are walking through these houses. It's just old Cubans watching TV. We get to the last house. It's the only one that has a door. He tells me, "Okay, I'm just going to get the stuff. You wait here." He enters. I hear him lock the door. I get the I'm about to get robbed feeling. I turn around, I see all the doorway we're passing now have doggy gates to prevent a quick getaway. So, I bolt. I'm doing some Olympic vaulting over these doggy doors. I hear the door swing open. My friend lacks weed yet has a knife. So, I speed up. Old Cuban women are attempting to grab me. They are getting an American 16-year-old stiff arm to the face. I get to the street. He is right on my tail. Book it about 5 more blocks. I see a cop. Basically power slide behind him. Look up. I see my friend halfway up the block. Gasps. Turns around. Yeah, I made it to base. The Cuban cop said something to me. I don't speak any Spanish. So, I just shrugged and walked in the opposite direction. Never saw my friend after that. friend, more like murderer in waiting. Years ago, I'm working one morning and my fiancée is off. She texts me around 10 or 11 and she says she had gone out to breakfast with her family and they bought her flowers and she was having a good morning. Blah blah. I was glad to hear that because she didn't really get along well with her family. The more the day went along, the more it all didn't sound right. Later that evening, she was acting unusual and she wouldn't tell me what was going on. So I checked the cell phone account activity and learned not only had she been texting and calling this random guy constantly, but she had been repeatedly lying to me about what she was doing or why she'd go do this and that or get off the phone with me, like to get back to work. There were so many instances where she hung up with me and immediately called him and had lengthy conversations. I then pointed at the flowers that were sitting on my table in my apartment. Really nice flowers. Vase with marbles. Probably cost $60 easily. I asked if they were from him. They were. That relationship ended right then and there. Yep, I got married to a girl who did this. She was super happy at her job and used to tell me every detail, then slowly but surely that stops. She dodges the question about work until I decide to look at her phone one day after she went out to do some photography in an area near her job. Open her messages and see her boss is texting her saying don't forget to bring the sex toy. Then weeks later I find a journal literally laying out each step she took with the guy. Shitty thing was we have 2 kids, so now they have to deal with divorced parents. Tried to make it work out, but once you lose trust in the relationship, hard to ever give it back. A few years ago I was out drinking for a friend's bachelorette party. I knew I was too drunk to drive, so I called my then boyfriend for a ride. As I was hanging up the phone, I thought to myself that I should ask him to drive his car instead of his motorcycle, but I didn't say anything. On the way home, we were sideswiped by a drunk driver in a Suburban. The front wheel of the motorcycle got caught in the wheel well and she dragged us down the street for about a block and a half. The only reason she stopped was because a cop pulled her over. She was so drunk she didn't even notice that she ran us over. To add to the trust your gut thing, my boyfriend only had one helmet, and I tried to get him to wear it, but he insisted that we weren't going anywhere until I was wearing it. My head hit the pavement pretty hard, but his didn't. If I hadn't been wearing the helmet, things would have gone much differently that night. To be fair, guy is a bit of an idiot. I have a car and motorcycle. If I know I am picking up a drunk partner at night, there is no way I am taking the bike. And if he only has one helmet, then it's even more ducking ridiculously stupid. I was like 6 years old and in the backyard of my best friend neighbor swimming in a 3-foot play pool thing. She went inside to ask for something and right as she left, a guy on a motorcycle drove down the alley and stopped. The fence was a small chain link fence, so he definitely saw me and stopped, and I could see him clearly. Like 20 years later it's still so vivid. He pulled out some gloves and put them on, which is the last thing I saw him doing as I got out and ran through their garage out the front and inside my house next door terrified. He drove around the front down the street slowly and about 10 minutes later shot 2 kids at the park at the end of my street. One day, about 2 weeks ago, I woke up and didn't feel pregnant anymore. Just found out today that the baby has no heartbeat. I knew because my breasts didn't feel full anymore. I was crying and squeezing them trying to feel the tenderness again. Miscarried a day later. The heartbreak eventually goes away, but it takes time. I am so sorry. Flowers kept disappearing from the church where I did organ practice, so the pastor asked me to keep an eye to see if I noticed anything unusual during daily practice sessions. At mid-afternoon, after area schools got out, I noticed a boy would come into the open church on his way home to pray and listen to the organ. But then, from the mirror on the console, I saw him taking flowers from the altar area just before he left. Finally, I asked him why. Turns out he was taking them to his grandmother's grave in the cemetery adjacent to the church. With tearful eyes, he said his family couldn't afford flowers, and he wanted to do something special with the ones left over from Sunday services and bring them to her grave because his grandma had loved flowers when she was still alive. I had a co-worker who used to go to parties in high school. Several of the parties in her senior year were at some guy's farm. She went to one and bailed right away saying it felt weird. The guy who owned the farm was Robert Picton. I used to work with a guy from Robertstown near the end of events. A lot of people in town. including the guy, would buy pig meat from Robert. They ate the pigs that ate the women. My dad had a friend that just had such a bad vibe to him. Like even if he tried to be nice it always came off as creepy. For fear of being prejudiced I decide to give him a chance and stop thinking of as a creepy individual. I start talking to him as a neighbor would, and mind you I am a 12-year-old girl. He invites me into his house one day while my parents were out and I just get a sense of uneasiness. Like death was right around the corner. I decline the offer and he says alright. I forget about it till years later I revisit the neighborhood and don't see him around. My neighbors all get weird about it. No one tells me anything until an old friend pulls me aside and tells me one of the most obvious yet unnoticed thing about him. He was a child molester. For all people in vulnerable situations, you don't owe friendliness to people that make you feel threatened. I see women do this a lot. Gals, we don't owe creepy catcallers or whatever any form of decency. Do what you gotta do to be safe. It's better to be a beach than to be dead hurt. The first friend that reached out to me in high school invited me to a sleepover that became a weekly occurrence. Met her stepdad, and instantly my stomach was unsettled. He was weird. Tried too hard to seem cool, strong, useful, and stuck around us when we set up the sleeping bags in the living room and hung out. I kind of understood why he lingered the first night, but the lingering continued throughout the couple of years I stayed over. I told my mum I thought he was weird and suspicious and she told me never judge a book by its cover. One day I found out that she had been continuously molested by him for years and had told her to bring friends over so he didn't molest her. Her mother admitted it was so he could groom the friends. He was physically aggressive with me one day and I never went back. Took a month or so but I couldn't take it and gathered as much evidence that I could. Things that used to mean nothing were suddenly glaringly obvious that something was wrong, and went to police. I was something I never really wanted to be true, but it had happened before. Same sort of something is very wrong here situation has happened to me a few other times with similar or same results. And I just knew that I couldn't be wrong, but I did question myself along the way. My father started publicly dating a woman shortly after my mother died. I later learned she's likely the woman he'd been having an affair with before she died. I liked her. One evening my father took me to one side and asked how I'd feel about him asking her to marry him. I got an awful feeling in the pit of my stomach and felt nauseated. I told my father I didn't want him to and he asked why as he thought I liked her. I explained that I did like her but had a bad feeling and he said that's just a feeling. They don't mean anything. He already had the ring and proposed straight away. I got really excited about the engagement, the wedding, moving house, and my impending little sister. After the wedding she changed. After my half-sister was born she went batshit. She abused me, my full sister, my mother's child, and later my half-sister, her own child. He only left her when my doctor told him something was clearly going on with her that was affecting my health. She was putting a substance that I'm intolerant to in my food and my father wouldn't believe me and would force me to eat whatever she made. However, I couldn't get a doctor alone without her to tell them and my maternal grandmother told him if he didn't leave her she'd go for custody. He accused me of lying for the entire time leading up to that and has never asked me about any of my attempts to get help since. I was walking home late at night and I jokingly told my friend we're gonna get mugged due to just a weird feeling. Few minutes later bang, me and friend get mugged. I kind of jinxed myself by making that remark, but in the back of my head walking home at dark that day was not meant to happen. Firstly, it was my brother's birthday but I opted to go to play for a football match instead. Secondly, my parents offered to pick me up due to it being late at night but being the ignorant guy I declined. Sometimes there are warning signs before those weird feelings. My mom and dad were at some sort of festival when my dad felt some sort of change in the air, like something bad was going to happen. He and my mom got out of there quickly. Wouldn't you know it, some drunk dude with a gun started firing at the crowd. A few years ago, I was just getting into our local arts community. There's a guy who owns a beautiful gallery space as well as the entirety of the remainder of the multiple story building. He does intricate stained glass work, and he has breathtaking glass installations in various sections of the building. The space is really dreamy. It was my first time checking out the space and meeting him, and he waved a friend of his over, who happened to be a construction worker that had been helping him remodel the building. He invited his friend to give me a tour of the place. I was excited over the warm welcome and to check out the rest of the building. So I followed the guy without a second thought. We walked around for maybe 10 minutes when we arrived at a somewhat isolated section of the 3rd floor where there weren't any working lights in the next room we were heading towards. The guy made a comment to me about the view from the windows being amazing. He waved me over and was like, come on, come check it out. I felt really vaguely weird at the time. And I was like, no, it's cool. I'll stay out here. I don't want to trip on anything. He tried to put his hand on my arm to guide me into the room with him. I said no again and took my hand back. The look on his face shifted, and his grip tightened as he tried to pull me into the room with him. Cue panic mode. Another girl happened to be walking up the stairs around the same time that this happened, and I pulled my hand away again and said that I was going to follow her back downstairs. I told the gallery owner about it, but he brushed it off saying that I misunderstood and that the other guy has problems and that it's hard for him to communicate with people sometimes. I still see him around that town every once in a while, and he's always surrounded by drugged out girls that are clearly unable to function. Him having his arms draped around them just disgusts me on so many levels. He's an absolute creep. I've told everyone I've met that he's a predator and to avoid him. I had a dream that my brother died the night before he did. Dream Friday night. Found dead of an overdose Saturday. But the dream was so real that I thought it had actually happened for years. My parents didn't tell us he'd died until Sunday, but I knew he was dead the whole weekend and was confused as to why they were acting like I didn't know. Acting like I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I don't really believe in premonitions or anything, but that's something I'll never be able to explain. Still wonder how different life would be if the dream had woken me up and I went and said something to him. It was probably the defining event of my life when including everything that followed. Everyone should read The Gift of Fear. Great book that might save yours or someone else's life. And it is in many ways more relevant now than when it was written. Especially for Americans. Heck, it was written pre-Columbine, yet accurately predicts the media cycle which would then increase the number of similar shootings in the following decades. I'm a member of a local Facebook group to help moms find babysitters. One of the admins was a mid-20s man who babysat for tons of kids in the area and specialized in caring for nonverbal and autistic children. His posts always gave me, and some other members, a weird vibe, but he was loved by this group as a whole. He was just arrested for molesting 2 children and possession of child porn. Bail is set at $2 million. It's estimated that he sat for over 500 children in our area. Who knows how many he abused. I was vacationing in Mexico with my family when I was 11. I was alone on the beach. I thought I heard screams from far out in the water, but I couldn't be sure. I kept building my sand castle. The screams were my mother, crying for help. She and my father and younger brother had been caught in a riptide. My father drowned while keeping my 9-year-old brother afloat long enough for rescue to arrive. If I had acted when I heard those screams, my dad would still be alive. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.